Hey everybody, so next I'm going to talk to you about how you can use photo emulsion from home and how you can get a nice exposure on a screen, or at least a usable one, without a big, heavy, expensive light exposure unit. So we'll try a couple different things and see what works the best. So first things first, let's coat this screen. And the emulsion that we use at our studio at Edinburgh is the Ulano RLX, and this emulsion is really great because it has a really broad window of how much light will give you a decent exposure. Okay, so let's go ahead and coat this screen, and I'm gonna pretend that I don't have a scoop coater. Let's see if I can use this squeegee to coat the screen. So you might not have a scoop coater, but if you don't have a squeegee, then how are you going to print? I know that there are some very basic kits that you can order from Dick Blick. I think there's a Speedball and there might be a Dick Blick version, and I will put a link to that in the notes of this. But with those kits, there is no squeegee and there is no scoop coater. You get kind of a dual purpose squeegee coater that is this kind of rectangle of plastic. So I'm gonna try and kind of appropriate what I think that might be like by trying to coat with this scoop coater. I think in a pinch, you could use something like a sheet of cardboard to coat a screen. I think that should work totally fine. I would not recommend using a credit card like I did with the screen filler, because with you could in a worst case scenario, but with photo emulsion, having a nice lean consistency to your coat is a lot more important than it is with printing with the screen filler. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull a little reservoir of emulsion across the bottom of this, and then I'm going to take the squeegee and just coat right across. We'll see how it goes. We like to pour our emulsion into slightly smaller containers. It can be a little bit easier to pour. This is definitely going to be way more than I need. So hopefully I'll be able to remove a little after I've coated. Let's go ahead and just pull that right across. And I'm going to try and just remove as much of the extra emulsion as I can off of the screen. It's going to just take so long to dry, and it'll probably just fall right off when I hit it with the hose. At the very least, I want to just sort of even it out, spread it out. All right, taking a look at my coat, it's a little thick, definitely pretty thick right there. That's not ideal. One thing I can try is I can try and take this squeegee and just pull it a second time and see if I can remove a little bit of that emulsion and thin it out a tiny bit. So I'm just gonna pull right up towards myself, and I can see that I grabbed some on the squeegee, which is good. That means I've removed a little bit of that extra emulsion that I think will just give me a hard time. And I should mention that this is photo emulsion, so it is photosensitive. It is much less photosensitive while it is in liquid form, and so I think I can coat this confidently without it overexposing in this brightly lit studio. But as soon as this is coated, I need to get it somewhere dark. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it in just some windowless room in the studio, turn off all the lights. If you're doing this from home, you might put it in your basement, shut off the lights. You might put it in maybe you have a bathroom that has no windows, or you can draw the blinds and just get it as dark as possible. You put a fan on this, it should be dry within a half an hour at the most, if you've got a nice thin coat. So I'm gonna go take care of this before it gets overexposed. So now that my screens are dry, the photo emulsion is dry, I need to expose them. And if you are in a place where you don't have access to an exposure unit, you could try something like this. So I've come up with this sort of DIY exposing unit, and it's not ideal in any way, shape, or form, and it's going to take a ton of testing to figure out exactly what time you want to expose your screen based on the light bulb and based on the emulsion. The emulsion that we're using is a RLX Ulano emulsion, and this lighting exposure unit is really not ideal for an emulsion like that. There is a TLX emulsion that Ulano makes that the exposure time is supposed to be 20% shorter, so that's definitely going to work a little bit better and a little bit faster than a unit like this, which is just so basic. The brighter the bulb you can get, the better. And ideally you want a bulb that's going to diffuse the light and expose more evenly, not focus the light too much like a flashlight or something would, or a spotlight. So this light that I have it's all right. It's going to work okay, but not as well as a much larger light, or even like some kind of halogen is going to work a lot better. But this will work. So I actually have a piece of glass, but a piece of plexiglass would work fine, and I've just extended it basically on two sawhorses. They're two little stools that are used for ceramics. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my screen and I'm going to attach two little films that I've drawn. I've drawn these on tracing paper with some opaque markers. I'm going to do a little 2-layer print that I've done before in the past. But as always with photo screen printing, your films are going to be on transparent paper or transparent film, and the tools that you've marked on them are going to be opaque things like opaque markers, India ink, paint markers work all right, or sometimes cut paper is a great tool, or Rubiolet. So I need to keep my screen dark. So right now I have it coated and it's sitting in a black garbage bag. And you could store screens like this for a fairly long time if you were storing them in your basement or something like that. As long as your basement's not too damp, they should last a few weeks, and they should stay dark if you put them in a trash bag like this. You could even double up and put them in multiple bags if you were concerned about the opacity. You just don't want light traveling through this material and exposing your screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the lights in this room, and I'm going to put my screen with these films taped to it underneath it. So the screen's going to press these films flat against the glass here, and I'm going to click this light on, and then I'm going to set a timer for a really long time, much longer than I would recommend exposing a screen. It's probably going to take me about 45 minutes, which is much longer. On our typical exposure unit that we use here, our exposure time is more like 2 minutes. So this is a really long time, and a long time means that there could be a lot of negative variables, which is, like I said, not ideal. But if you were printing from home and you wanted to give this a shot, and maybe you're using the TLX emulsion, maybe you can figure out something that works for you. So let's turn those lights off. It's still pretty bright in here, but with this emulsion I'm using, the cure time is so long that this natural lighting really isn't going to affect it much at all. Keeping it in a trash bag is still a good rule of thumb. So let's tape these films to my screen. Make sure that they're facing the correct direction. Okay. So then we'll place the screen right on top. Looks pretty good. And now, with our fancy exposure unit, it has a vacuum table that sucks all the air out, and a sheet of rubber holds the screen really tight against our exposure unit. This is a DIY exposure unit. So what I'm gonna do to try and replicate that suction and that effect that pulls the film tight against the glass, I'm gonna take a little sheet of black foam core and I'm gonna lay it inside the screen. And then I'm going to take some gallon ink containers and I'm just gonna set them gently on top of my foam core, and the weight of those is gonna press it tight against the glass. And I'll get a nicer exposure, hopefully. Still not ideal, and the amount of time it doesn't help anything really either. So let's click this on, and I'm gonna start a timer, and I'll be back in 45 minutes, and we'll see if I got a decent exposure. So I've just finished exposing the screen. I exposed it for a very long time, 45 minutes. And I'm gonna just take these films off and rinse it off in the sink. And we will see if it worked or if it did not work. And even if it does work, I may just have to finesse it a little bit. I may have to decide when I think I should stop rinsing it. Maybe it will start to look like too much is falling out, or if not enough is falling out, I may have to, just sort of rub it a little bit, try and work some of the emulsion out of it while I'm cleaning it. So I'm gonna walk this over to the sink. So anytime I wash a screen, I like to get both sides a little bit damp. Definitely see my images starting to appear pretty quickly. I can also see the emulsion turning really pink really fast. That probably is an indicator that it's a little underexposed. So maybe I could expose this a little bit longer. All right, looks like the image is starting to fall out, which is good. Hopefully the rest of the screen won't fall out. Wow, that's wonderful actually. That is perfect. I'm retaining all my detail. None of the rest of this emulsion or in the negative space has fallen out. This screen is totally usable, and we exposed it using a piece of glass, 2 stools, and just a clip lamp. So I'm really pleased with this. I still think that the emulsion could be stronger. I think if I rubbed it with my hand, I could start to work it off of the screen. So what I would recommend to you if you're doing this at home is to let this dry pretty thoroughly, and then I would throw it back on your DIY exposure unit for, maybe an hour. So I post-exposed this screen on the same light exposure unit for about an hour, and I think it looks pretty good. I think the emulsion looks pretty strong. So I'm gonna go ahead and print both of these layers. It'll probably take me a couple of minutes, but it'll give us an idea of how strong this emulsion is if it holds up while I print it. So I made this 2 layers. I've got this little brown Strathmore paper that I had sitting around. So first I'll print this lighter color, which is like a mid-tone layer. That seems okay. For starters, we're going to be printing onto acetate so that I can get a better idea of where the image is going to fall, so I can do registration. And okay, so I just flooded it. And this is interesting. It looks like there might be a little bit of emulsion stuck. Okay, so that's something to look out for if you expose a screen this way. I basically didn't rinse it out all of the way with the fear of too much emulsion coming off, so I kind of let up at the end. And when you do that, there can be a really fine layer of the emulsion that can, it's basically as thin as water, but it can drip through and it can fill some of the areas of your screen. I think if that happens, you just can try and pull the, try and clear the screen a few more times, and you can push that very thin layer of emulsion through, which I have done. And I think this looks pretty good. So I can move my acetate aside. I don't want the paper going anywhere, but I'm just gonna set up a little tape registration jig. Set that aside, and it moved a little bit. Okay, so now I've got my tape registration set up the way I want it. Let's put this down and let's print one. I think it looks pretty good. I think it moved too much. I'm gonna use a lot of force because I really want it to clear, and it's gonna stick. So I think before I print another, I'll raise the off contact of the screen. But my first thoughts are that this looks good. It's a subtle layer, it's just a mid-tone, but I'm satisfied with that. I think that the next layer is gonna really pull the image together. So I'm gonna go grab some foam core shims that I'm gonna put here and here, and just to raise the off contact, it'll help it stop the sticking a little bit. All right, so I just finished my edition. I printed 9. Doesn't seem to be breaking up at all right now. So I'm sure I could print more if I wanted to. Sticking, there was quite a bit of sticking. That may in part be because of the emulsion not being cured as nicely as it could be. So once you add ink, it starts to kind of weaken the emulsion a little bit. And when I go to clean this out, I might find that the emulsion starts to fall out a little bit. So this might not last as long as a typical screen. So now that that's done, typically I would go and clean this right away so I don't get any ink drying out in the screen. But for the sake of demonstration, I'm just going to pull some of this ink out and just transition right over to the final key layer. So I'm going to add a little reservoir of this dark gray just above my image. And we'll reuse these tape registration pieces. Let's put this acetate down once again for registration purposes. And I'll put one of these underneath. And then go ahead and flood it and then pull one. Once again, I think I'm gonna have to pull this a couple of times just to push any of that residual dried emulsion through the screen, which I think I've done. That looks pretty darn good. Alright, I'm satisfied with that. I'm going to go ahead and, without moving my paper at all, set this aside. And while holding this still as possible. We'll put these little tape pieces to mark the edges. And I'll reuse these multiple times, but they do start to lose their stickiness over time. All right. I'll go ahead and pull one. I think I'll pull this twice just to really push the ink through. Ideally, you should be able to get a nice print with one pull, but it's not too bad. So this was a little design I made for to get some of our students to join our printmaking club at Edinburgh University. The midtone's kind of subtle, but we're getting, everything is coming through pretty nicely. Some of this text looks a little bit small and fuzzy. That could be an issue of some light bending around the film during the exposing process, or maybe I could have washed that little spot out a tiny bit more. But in general, that looks pretty good. And all of the way we've prepared this screen is ways and things you could do from home. Maybe if I pull a little faster. See if I can get one good. Yeah, no sticking. One nice pull. And that's really nice and easy. And so all I've got to do now is clean this screen. I'll start by scraping all of the ink off of the screen and off of the squeegees. We usually do that just with an old credit card, or you could use a piece of chipboard or cardboard. And then I'm gonna take this screen and rinse off all the ink. And then the difficult thing, reclaiming the screen. Reclaiming the screen without a power washer might be a little bit of a challenge. The best advice I can give, and the way I'm going to try and do that, is by using the reclaimer that is made for the screen, and I'll really scrub that reclaimer into the emulsion, and I'll scrub it for so long that it will be almost completely broken down into a liquid, and then my hope is that I can just rinse off the screen and it will be pretty close to perfectly clean, so I can reuse it. I think if you dirtier screens are harder to reclaim. Once they get stuff stuck in them, it's easier to get new stuff to just fall right out of the screen. So if you've got a dirty screen, or maybe it's a well-loved screen, you might have a really difficult time reclaiming. Having more water pressure hit those dirty areas is helpful. So if you don't have access to a power washer, definitely an outdoor hose will work really well. So first of all, I'll just get all this ink out of the screen. I like to use a sponge. I think it helps break the ink up a lot faster, just like doing your dishes. Having a tool to do them is just gonna save you a bunch of time. All right, so I cleaned out all of the ink. Just looking at how pink the emulsion looks, I can tell it really wants to fall right off, which is great if I'm ready to reclaim it. And honestly, I think you could let this dry, and as my screen right now is, and print this another time and it would be okay. But I think because, just to show you that we can reclaim this at home, I'm gonna spray it and try and reclaim it. I think I'm gonna try and do it just with this faucet, which would be sort of shocking if it works perfectly. But I think with a screen in this condition, you can easily reclaim this with reclaimer made by Ulano and an outdoor hose. I think it should work fine. I'm gonna spray pretty generously because I really want to make sure that it gets nice and broken up. I'm gonna wet this Brillo pad. And if you didn't have reclaimer, bleach, like a Comet powdered bleach should work just fine. Alright, I've been scrubbing this for a pretty long time. I'm going to try and rinse it with the faucet. I have a feeling that not everything is going to come out. It's just a little too resilient. So I'll try a couple things if that does not work. Definitely some stuff stuck in this screen. I got probably about half of the information out, but that's not good enough if I want to use this screen again. So I'm going to try something else. One thing I can try, I could try and let it soak in reclaimer for maybe a half an hour or so, see what that works out like. I could lay this down in a garbage bag maybe and get it really saturated in reclaimer. See if that reclaimer really starts to eat away at some of these more persistent areas. So one kind of DIY solution I'm going to attempt is I'm going to take this black trash bag and I'm actually going to cut it into sort of like cut it down one side so that it becomes this sort of object I can open up and put a screen inside. And then what I'm going to do is put a screen inside of it. You can see the plastic kind of adhering to the screen right there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to really spray this down. Really saturated now. And then I'm going to take the other side and I'm just going to kind of seal it up. And what this is going to do is it's going to keep the mesh that has emulsion on it really soaking wet in reclaimer for a long time. It's a bit, there are reclaiming tanks in some t-shirt shops, and a reclaiming tank would be a big tank just full of reclaimer. You could toss a screen into it and keep it saturated in reclaimer for a long time, and it speeds up the reclaiming process for t-shirt companies. This, I think, is an interesting way to try and have your own little DIY tank. This mesh is just going to soak, and I'm hoping that if I leave it here for a half hour, maybe the information that I couldn't get off will be a little easier to spray off. So just to give a few final thoughts about reclaiming a screen without a power washer. I let this screen soak in that bag covered in reclaimer overnight actually, and I still had a pretty difficult time taking off the emulsion. So I would probably avoid the sink for removing emulsion, jump right to a garden hose like this. You're going to want to use as much pressure as you possibly can. And when you do, you can get quite a bit of pressure. It's really not that different from a power washer. You're probably going to get a lot wetter. And you might just have to have a lot of patience as it may take a little bit longer. But I sat here and sprayed with that hose for a while, and I've gotten it pretty darn clean. There's a little bit of an emulsion haze in some areas. I might soak it in some bleach. I could also put that in a bag overnight and see if it helped at all. But I think part of the problem that often makes emulsion harder to remove from a screen is if you do underexpose it. Something about the chemical combination of the emulsion, it becomes more difficult to take off when you've underexposed it and then dried it and done a post-exposure. But in general, despite some of the challenges, it is possible to screen print from home using either the photo emulsion photo process or screen filler and drawing fluid process. Thanks for watching this video on ways to screen print from home using photo emulsion without an exposure unit or power washer. I'd like to revisit this experiment one day. Maybe I can further refine DIY photo screen printing. If you found this video informative, look for videos in the next few months by Future Best Print Club.